Gratitude is such a small thing. Saying thank you is such a small thing. And yet it means so much. To the person who hears it, it's great. But to you, to the person who says thank you, it is beneficial for us mentally and spiritually and even physically. And we'll look at some of that today about how beneficial gratitude can be. So the power of gratitude is what we'll talk about over the next 3 Sundays. Hope that you can join us for each one of those. Again, if you want to pull up the study notes for today, all the scriptures I'll be using in order, except for the longer scripture, there's a link to it. You push that, and it'll take you to the Bible app, and it'll take you to the exact version I'm going to read from in just a few moments. But I'll be reading in the New Living Translation today, so if you don't have that, but you want to pull it up on your phone, or you want to see some of the quotes and things I'll be using, pull that up on your Church Center app right now. I don't know if you noticed this enormous card. This is a card. What? Isn't that cool? But this is for our volunteers, so I wanted to thank our volunteers this year in a special way. And I didn't notice that on the back. It just says a lot of thank yous. I could have fooled you. I could have said it was a different card next week anyway. All right, I didn't do that. But thank you, volunteers. We like celebrating our volunteers because we are a volunteer-driven organization. We would not be able to do anything without our volunteers. They're so awesome. And so I just wanted to say thank you to our volunteers. We've got volunteers serving right now that aren't hearing this in our kids' areas. But we thank them, and we're so grateful for them. We thank our check-in volunteers and our audio-visual folks and the folks that just blessed you with music here as well, folks that opened the door, folks that watched the little ones. And I heard from one of our volunteers today that she got spit up on all over last week, and so she's wearing the badge of honor and courage of the nursery work. And so, it's just, it just takes all of these folks coming together to do that good work. So I am very grateful for them. And as we start kind of tackling this idea of gratitude this month, I want us to start thinking about the benefits of gratitude. Like, yes, very much to the person who hears it, it's good to hear. Thank you is good to hear. But you and I both know it's not really necessary most of the time. And Jesus knew that too in that teaching. Jesus didn't need the feedback to hear thank you. The reward was in the doing of the project itself. The reward was in the healing of those people. Many times you give to someone and you know that you'll never hear a thank you, especially I know that I work with our homeless folks, or when we pack a box, maybe some of you are going to pack a box and you'll never hear a thank you. You're not getting a note in the mail for that. But in some way you don't really need that. But it's so good for the person saying thank you. That's where gratitude really, really finds its secret sauce. So I think about this even further and think about times that I've been able to express gratitude to people. It's always been something that I think they were appreciative to hear it. I know one person I thanked from high school many years later, kind of oops, I should have thanked them at the time, one of my teachers, and I said, hey, I'm really grateful for the impact you made. And, it registered, I think, like that they appreciated hearing it, but it meant more to me to kind of get it off my chest that I had needed to say that for a long time. In your life, you may find that similar as when you start expressing gratitude and it becomes easier to do on a regular basis and it becomes more natural. And that's what I want to really, really talk about today. How unnatural it feels sometimes to push yourself to say thank you. Culture has tried to shape us in ways to think that it's weakness for us to say thank you to someone. Like if you're having to express gratitude to someone, it's a little bit of a weakness on your part, isn't it? Because you weren't enough. You couldn't accomplish it on your own. You had to say thank you to someone for helping you out. Isn't that silly? But that's kind of where we're at right now. Thank you cards are not flying off the shelves at Hallmark. People are getting cultured a little bit to not say thank you as much. And yet, we're really missing out on what it could do. I have a theory about gratitude, and that it's not the default. That gratitude's not default for us. Gratitude is something we have to work on. We have to hone it like a skill or a practice. Because if we don't, the default is to do what the other lepers did at Jesus. They just walked away. They took the healing and they walked away from him. The one returned. Let's talk today, as we start to kind of dive into this, about the powerful effects of gratitude. that not only do we find in the New Testament and the Old Testament today, but science. Psychologists have been studying this for a while. It started with, and I brought this up a few years ago, I did a summer class, a master's level class in the study of happiness. And part of that study of happiness that we worked through some of that material was the idea that people that express gratitude are happier and tend to be happier longer and have longer sustained periods of happiness than people who just keep it to themselves. Even folks that were introverted, if they could push themselves to express gratitude, they found positive benefits. In fact, some of the research I've been reading just this week showed that gratitude protected against depression in chronically ill patients. Cancer patients who expressed gratitude reported less incident of depression. Gratitude was also found in another study to counteract the symptoms of depression by enhancing a state of peace of mind, a sustained peace of mind. There was another study done that tried to show for folks that are going through clinical depression due to a terminal diagnosis or like a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, the benefits of psychedelics versus the benefits of some of the simple things we talk about sometimes, like gratitude. They were actually quite similar in their effects. The simplest, easiest, cheapest, non-medical intervention of gratitude counteracted the symptoms of depression and gave those patients an enhanced peace of mind. That's crazy. I was just like, wow. There was a study done in Italy I read that showed that gratitude in young men buffered against feelings of inadequacy. Marked difference between their peers who had trouble expressing gratitude with feeling inadequate versus those that did not have those same feelings. Further research. Gratefulness was shown in the Journal of Research and Personality to increase emotional well-being across the board. That almost every category of emotional well-being was raised by being grateful. Expressing gratefulness, these people are more resilient to the effects of trauma. This was found in the Behavior Research and Therapy Journal. And overall, again, back to this Harvard Business School study from 2007, grateful people reported higher and more consistent, meaning sustained levels of happiness. So if you struggle with gratefulness, I think there's a lot of evidence that shows us that gratefulness is really good for us. That gratefulness is good not just for the hearer, like that we think always, but it's good for us. Gratefulness leads to improved mental health, lowered stress levels, and increased happiness is what the research shows. So with all this good, why would we ever not express gratefulness? I've heard all kinds of excuses, and you and I probably share some of those. We've probably had these little dialogues in ourselves. I know with that one in high school, it was high school, it was college before I said thank you, about 4 years too late. I kept thinking, well, it's too far, it's too late. Did you know there's no expiration on saying thank you? There's no expiration date on that. It's not like your milk. It's not like cheese. It's not going to go bad. Even if you have forgotten 10, 15 years, you can still express gratefulness. And you kind of remove that off of your heart because it kind of weighs you down until then. Now, there is no study that shows being ungrateful weighs you down. The studies are all in the positive nature that I have seen so far. All the research is about when you express gratefulness, when you are full of gratitude, the benefits. But it would kind of make sense that if you're holding on to it and you just refuse to say thank you, that it probably does weigh on you. I know it does me. I mean, I can give you anecdotal evidence that it was weighing on me like a burden until I said that thank you. They weren't waiting on it. No one's out there just like chomping at the bit, I don't think. Like, well, today better be the day they come say thank you. But it's kind of like an unexpected blessing for them. But for you, oh wow, how powerful is that? To get that off of your chest, get that off your back. And to experience the benefits, because here's what I've also found. Once you get that one out of the way, that one that's kind of blocking your gratitude radar right now, If that's a thing, I made that up. But anyway, once you get that out of the way, it's like a snowball. Other thanks are easier after that. It's easier to make it more a part of your lifestyle versus, Pastor Clark said I better calendar it, so every Thanksgiving I'm going to thank one person. I know I've seen some silly things like, people telling us that you ought to thank people every day in November. Every day you ought to thank someone different. And some of us start really powerful, and those first 5 days are awesome, and then we forget, and then we get to Thanksgiving and we try to make up for it. But you know what? We could do that every day. We don't got to wait for a month. And we're apt to forget and get busy. So incorporating it into your regular pattern of life. I mean, you woke up and brushed your teeth this morning, right? Some of you stole mints out of the bathroom. I saw it. But make it a part. Make it a pattern. Make saying thank you not weird for you, but normal for you. Just like exercise or brushing your teeth or anything, to make it a pattern, you've got to start incorporating it. And I think it's interesting that there's kind of two ways of looking at this. And I think of this prism picture here kind of helped me see that. Like when the light beam hits the prism and makes that beautiful rainbow. Like there's two ways of looking at the same thing. You can look at life and say, no one owes me anything. I read this author that said, look, no one owes you anything. And so many have less than you. And so anything you have, you could say, man, I am blessed. The other way to look at life, he said, is to say, I deserve more. I have a lot of things, but I want to have bigger and better and more. And so I'm jealous of others. One way is pretty much the default way of our culture. And one way is this upside down living Jesus invites you into, to look at how blessed you are, to look at how much you have, to look at yourself and say, I don't need more because look at how much I have in comparison to others. I am blessed. Many have less than me. Some have more than me. That's not the point of life anyway. But I could be grateful for what I've been given. I share with you some of the teachings of one of my favorite German theologians quite a bit, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I share that with you because he was a guy that really stood in the face of pressure. He was one of the leading pastors of the movement against Nazism in Germany when it rose up. And so the church kind of split in Germany, if you don't know this history. There was the Confessing Church, which actively worked against the National Socialist Party. And there was this other organization. Oddly enough, Hitler created a religion, kind of, called positive Christianity, of all things. And it was kind of removing a lot of the good things about Christianity, and certainly it was removing people that would stand against him. Well, Bonhoeffer was eventually imprisoned for his work against Hitler and put to death shortly before the war ended. But he wrote extensively, and his theologies have been shared, and his writings, his description of God and his description of the world and our place in it. And so I love reading his writings, and to hear him teach and know much of his work was done from prison in that environment is just wild. And so he wrote this about gratitude, and I wanted to share it with you today. He said, in ordinary life, we hardly realize that we receive a great deal more than we give, and that it is only with gratitude that life becomes rich. Here's a guy that knows what a rich relationship with God looks like. Because I know I talk about being dependent on God a lot, but in my life, I've never been tested like Bonhoeffer was tested. I've never been that dependent. I've never been in a prison cell facing sure execution and being able to maintain a sense of myself and my relationship with God that I could say something like this. Isn't it interesting? As we put ourselves into this perspective, we say, wow, there may never be a situation in life where I fully grasp just how blessed I am. Is my life perfect? Absolutely not. Have there been some horrible, terrible days? Has there been some trauma? Is there hurt and pain in my life? Absolutely. But I've been given more than I give. And so it's only with gratitude that I'll ever really know what rich feels like. In 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul says something kind of similar to that. He says, always be joyful. Never stop praying. Be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. Now, I just gave you someone that was during World War II imprisoned, Pastor Bonhoeffer, and now we talk about the Apostle Paul, who also wrote from prison and was imprisoned many times unjustly. So here we have two guys that have been imprisoned for their faith, and both kind of a similar perspective. Be thankful in all circumstances. How do you do that? That's so difficult to wrap our minds around. And yet it is this deep appreciation, this gratitude, this thankfulness that he says is the clear will of God for our life. I know a lot of time we struggle with, what's God's will for my life? What's God want me to do? And I would say in certain circumstances, in certain decisions you're facing, that can absolutely be a gut-wrenching kind of thing. But in this, it's not. Paul writes to this church, look, it's pretty clear. It's pretty simple what God wants you to do. He wants you to be thankful. The psalmist in the Old Testament said, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. It goes back to this idea that it's a recognition of just how much I've been blessed, just how much good and unmerited good is in my life. That I can say, I've been blessed, and I don't deserve everything I have, but I am thankful for that. Now, at this point, as we've looked at the Old Testament, the New Testament, we've looked at theology and what the theologians say, the question becomes, this is a great theory, but how do you actually live this out? Because our culture tries to shape us in a different way. To not being grateful, to not saying thank you, but to try to take credit for everything on your own. I'm a self-made man. I figured this all out. We love that story for some reason. We love the champion who's figured it all out. We love the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of the world. And oh, wow, this genius came up with this idea and just totally set the world on fire. And what we do is we forget that there were teams of people behind them, legions of people behind them, doing the hard, everyday work to get those amazing things created. But we like to just pretend it's one person. It's like the Wizard of Oz. We like to pretend that there's this big wizard in this big emerald castle, and that's not really the truth, the fantasy. And so what we have to do is learn and teach ourselves and train ourselves and make it a habit of thanking people. You are not born with gratitude. Little baby comes out and doesn't thank mama for keeping them alive for 9 months. That's not the first words the baby has when it comes out. Thank you, doctor, for delivering me. I'm glad to be here today. Mom, thanks for carrying me and sustaining me for the last 9 months. No, they come out and give me. Right? They're upset. I don't know why they're so upset, but they're here and they're upset. And babies, we have to teach children gratitude. Think about one of those first lessons you learn in the daycare or in the nursery. Two kids, one toy. What's going to happen? A fight will ensue. Mine. Gratitude is not natural. It is not built in here. It is part of our fallen world to take and to keep and to hoard, and to be ungrateful. So, if we want to be people that experience the positive benefits of gratitude, we have to teach ourselves. We have to learn. We have to not be an infant, and we have to move beyond infancy with our emotional intelligence. And this is a large part of that. People that are enabled to express thanks are not fully developed and matured emotionally. They are toddlers. Now, physically we grow up, But mentally and emotionally and spiritually, we can stay as a toddler. Me, gimme, right? As ridiculous. And if we see this in a person, like at a store, you see someone just total meltdown mode on customer service, what do? Most of us go, good luck with all that, and we're out, right? We want to get away from that weirdo. That's wild. Now, when it's us, we're completely in the right. We have figured it all out, and the customer service person's got it wrong. But when we see someone else, we're just like, whoa, someone's having a bad day. We must learn. We must grow. We can't stay stuck as a baby. I want to share with you a story about Jesus and one of the miracles in Matthew chapter 14. And I've read this story here before. This is not the first time you've ever heard this, but there's something that just jumped out at me this week as I was kind of researching for this in this story that I've never drilled down on. I've never thought about. It's one phrase. It's one small part of the story. It's not the point of the story, but it was something that just jumped out at me as a teaching moment for me personally, and I hope it will help you as well. So Matthew 14, beginning in verse 13. This is the story of where Jesus feeds the 5,000. It says, as soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. That evening, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves. But Jesus said, that isn't necessary. You feed them. But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Bring them here, he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. And Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted. And afterward, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day in addition to all the women and children. Now, the thing that really got me here is in verse 19. Prior to the miracle, just prior to the miracle had not occurred yet. The miracle is when he started breaking the bread and distributing the fish, and there was enough to eat out of these 2 fish and 5 loaves for 15,000 people, really. 5,000 men, and in addition to the women and children, so let's just assume about 15,000 people were fed. But right before that, that's what got me, that I hadn't focused on before. He took the bread, he took the fish, he looks up towards heaven, and he gives thanks. He blesses it. He prays over the meal. Jesus, who knows a miracle is about to happen, thanks God before it's happened. Now that got me. Because we're not Jesus. We can't see beyond this moment. And yet sometimes we want to see things happen before we give thanks. We want to see results happen. We want to see the thing we've been praying about happen. We ask and demand sometimes. But what a statement here that Jesus took these elements and looked towards heaven and gave the Father thanks for what he was about to do. What would it look like in our life if we had such a sense of gratitude that we were thankful before we even received what we desired or wanted? What would it look like if we thanked God in faith like Jesus did? That it would be accomplished. That it is way too big for us to figure out in our own strength and our own abilities, and we would just give God that thanks first. That may be difficult for you to do off the bat, first day. I could agree with that. And so let's take it a smaller step. I love what Marcus Aurelius said. He's one of the Stoic philosophers I read quite a bit. He said, when you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. What he is saying here is ruminate, meditate on goodness first thing. You get up in the morning, think first about what a privilege is. Anybody wake up in the morning and think, I want to go back to bed, and you hit the snooze? Or you think, I don't want to go to work, right? You ever have that? I love my job, and I still don't want to wake up in the morning sometimes. I'm still like, or you get that stuff in your eyes, and you're just like, I want to go back to bed. And I hit my snooze. How many of you set multiple alarms? You sickos, right? Right? You got like 10 alarms. They're going off every 5 minutes. You're like, nope, no. It's like whack-a-mole, right? And so, like, I know that feeling. What would it shift in your life if you could wake up and you rub that out, but before you have coffee, ooh, that's tough, isn't it? A lot of people don't want to talk or think before they have coffee. What would it look like if the first thing you rose in the morning, you thought, what a privilege today is, what a beautiful day it is. Yeah, I've got some stressful things coming up. Yeah, I've got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I'm going to be tired at the end of the day, but you know what? What a beautiful day to be alive, to be able to think, to use my mind, to be able to enjoy this moment, to be able to love others. A small step. Maybe not for the big things in your life, the big stress in your life, but what would it look like to take a small step? So this week, here's my challenge for you. Gratitude is a choice, and gratitude is learned. Gratitude is not normal. It's not default. You can't be blamed for that. It's not your fault that gratitude is not just pouring out of you right and left. But it is a part of growing up spiritually. It is a part of growing up mentally and emotionally. It is a part of maturity to be able to express gratefulness. So, when you choose to be grateful, you get benefits. That's good. So how does that work? Well, what if this week you just focused on one good thing in your life, one goodness, and you tried to cultivate an attitude of gratitude around that one thing? I'm not saying enumerate a pro-con list of every good and bad thing in your life. I'm not saying go thank every high school teacher this week. Don't hear me wrong. Because if you do too much, it won't get done. You know that. We all know that. If you make lists like I do, you know too many things on the list. 3 a day is good for me. That's about my list. And those things will get done. 25 things on that list, maybe one gets done. And the rest, I'm like, that's tomorrow Clark's problem. Today Clark is not going to do that. What if you just took one thing and you center your week around that one thing, one good thing in your life? Choose one good thing. Thank God for it. Thank others for it. Thank friends or family or your spouse or your teacher. Thank whoever you need to thank in that situation. But you just cultivated an attitude of gratitude. Like a fire, like you're building a fire. Like you put that little kindling down, right? You put some fire to it and you blow on it and you get it going and you make it a roaring fire by week's end. But you go slow and you focus on one good thing in your life. Cultivate that gratitude around it. And see if that doesn't set some other blazes in your heart of fire where you go, I need to be thankful for that too. Oh, you know what? That's going to chain react into others. The domino effect starts going, and all of a sudden you realize how blessed you are, and there's really a lot of good things in your life. What would it look like for you to express to God right now? Thank you. Meister Eckhart's one of my favorite writers on prayer from the 1800s. And one of his most beautiful sayings, I think, ever, was he just said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, that is enough. What would it look like just to say that? Just to say thank you to God?